I have heard a lot of terrible sounds in my 69 years on this earth. I've heard the unnatural silence following an explosion in a desert valley. I've heard the frantic tearing of medical packaging in the back of a pitch-black helicopter. But nothing has ever moved through my bloodstream like the sound of my daughter whispering into the phone. "Dad, if I don't make it through tonight, don't let him get away with it." The line didn't go dead immediately. Instead, it dissolved into a sickening, heavy thud, the unmistakable sound of human weight hitting a drywall partition. 11 minutes later, I had her husband pinned face down to his own imported kitchen tile. 2 sheriff's deputies were coming through the front door with their hands on their holstered weapons. The husband was screaming that I had attacked him, demanding they arrest me. But the deputies weren't looking at him, they were looking at me. And in the tense, silent geometry of that room, I knew exactly why. I want to be perfectly honest about how we got to that kitchen floor. For most of my life, I believed the kindest thing a man with my past could do was stay quiet. I thought fading into the background was wisdom. Now I realize it might have just been a cowardly form of hiding. So, let me start from the part that nobody in my family saw coming, least of all the arrogant man whose wrist I was holding a millimeter away from a compound fracture. His name was Brandon Keller. He was 38 years old, 6'2", with a razor-sharp jawline and a haircut that cost more than my monthly fuel bill. Brandon sold high-end luxury yachts down at the Astoria Marina. He was the kind of man who walked through every door like the entire room had been holding its breath, just waiting for him. When he married my daughter, Megan, I tried to like him. I put in a genuine, exhausting effort. After I lost my wife, Helen, to a sudden stroke 6 winters ago, Megan was the only family I had left. When she first brought Brandon home, she was glowing. She laughed with her whole chest. Because I wanted to see her happy, I deliberately swallowed 100 small things that bothered me. I ignored the relentless bragging. I looked past his habit of pouring a heavy third drink before dinner. I bit my tongue when he talked over her, treating her sentences like speed bumps. I told myself every young marriage encounters rough water. That was my first mistake. My name is Walter Brandt. I live in Astoria, Oregon, a rugged fishing town wedged between the Columbia River and the Pacific Rain. The locals see me as a fixture, the quiet old man in the faded gray pickup truck, buying salmon down at the docks, fixing outboard motors for half the street without sending an invoice, sitting alone at the Pig and Pancake Diner every Friday. That is all they see, and the honest truth is, I preferred it that way. Before I settled into this rhythm, I spent 27 years in naval special warfare. By the time I handed in my papers, I had experienced enough deafening noise and burned through enough adrenaline to last 4 ordinary lifetimes. I genuinely thought I had finally bought myself some permanent peace. I was dead wrong. The first time I felt the floorboards shift under Megan's marriage was during a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years back. Megan had learned to cook standing on a stool beside her mother. That year, overwhelmed, she let the turkey stay in the oven a few minutes too long. It was just a little dry around the edges. Brandon took his fork, cut one slice, chewed with exaggerated difficulty, and set down his knife. He announced to the entire table, "Well, sweetheart, it's a good thing you've got the looks. Because the kitchen sure isn't your battlefield." His friends chuckled. Megan laughed, too. But I watched her shoulders climb up toward her ears before the joke even finished landing. It was the involuntary physical reaction of a body bracing itself for an impact it has felt many times before. When you spend nearly 3 decades reading micro-expressions on people who want to kill you, you never lose the habit. You never stop reading the small tells. The big gestures can be faked, but the small ones never lie. I started observing him with clinical precision. At Christmas, he openly mocked the sweater she had spent weeks picking out. At a neighborhood barbecue, he snapped viciously at her for forgetting limes. At every dinner, he aggressively corrected her stories. "That's not how it happened," he would interrupt, rolling his eyes. Megan's completely hopeless with details. Tiny cuts, 1,000 microscopic bleeding cuts, and every single time, she smiled through it, swallowing her own dignity. That strained, apologetic smile scared me infinitely more than a raised fist ever could. If you have ever watched someone you deeply love slowly apologize for merely taking up space in their own life, you already know the specific, suffocating brand of helplessness I am describing. You don't have hard proof. You just have a cold feeling in your gut that something beautiful is dying right in front of you. One evening, late in the summer, I invited them over for supper in my backyard. Just grilled burgers and a tub of potato salad. A couple of my neighbors drifted by. Brandon had clearly been drinking heavily before he arrived. He swaggered over, leaned against my fence, and watched me work the grill. "You know, Walt," he said loudly, "you are easily the quietest old man I've ever met." I kept my eyes on the coals. "Is that meant to be an insult, Brandon?" "Nah, just an observation," he smirked. "Most ex-military guys won't shut the hell up. You act like it never happened. What did you even do over there?" "Stamp paperwork." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. I calmly flipped a burger patty. "Something like that." He pointed his beer bottle at my chest. "Megan acts like you're some kind of secret legend." Personally, I think most of those war stories are 90% pure exaggeration. The yard went dead quiet. I didn't glare. I didn't raise my voice. I just flipped another burger. I gave him absolutely nothing. Men like Brandon are parasites. They eat reactions for breakfast. If you starve them of a reaction, they feel like a ghost. A few minutes later, Megan hurried inside to help me carry plates. The absolute second we were out of earshot, she touched my arm. "I'm sorry about him, Dad." As she reached for the plates, her sleeve rode up. I saw it, a dark, ugly bruise blooming on the inside of her wrist, half buried beneath foundation makeup. "What happened there, sweetie?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly level. She yanked her sleeve down instantly. "Nothing, Dad. I bumped into the kitchen island." "Megan, please, Dad." That single word. She wasn't annoyed. She was terrified. And just like that, the veil was ripped away. I knew that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my unheated garage. I walked over to the corner and unlatched a heavy wooden chest I hadn't opened in years. Inside was another man's entire life. Faded photographs, challenge coins, a folded flag, and one small laminated card containing emergency communication protocols. When Megan was 15, I taught her a few unbreakable safety signals. If she ever felt unsafe but couldn't speak freely, she could send certain plain text phrases that secretly meant something else entirely. We treated it half like a game back then, but I made her memorize one specific rule. If you ever send the real distress code, I am coming immediately. I will ask 0 questions. I am coming. For the next several weeks, I didn't confront Brandon. Confrontation without preparation is just noise. Instead, I shifted gears. I stopped being the retired handyman and silently reactivated the part of my brain I had spent years trying to shut down. I started running a full, quiet surveillance operation on my own son-in-law. I started doing what I was trained to do, gathering actionable intelligence. Under the guise of being a helpful, retired father-in-law, I offered to fix some minor issues around their newly purchased house in the upscale subdivision on the edge of town. I told Brandon I'd repair the faulty wiring on their back porch light. He just smirked, tossed me the keys, and told me not to track mud on his expensive rugs. He thought I was just an old man playing with wire strippers. He had no idea I was mapping the entire structural layout of his property. I noted the blind spots in the cheap security cameras he had installed. I memorized the layout of the floorboards, mentally cataloging which ones creaked under weight and which ones remained silent. I cross-referenced his work schedule at the marina, taking careful note of the nights he claimed he was working late and the aggressive way his tires peeled out of the driveway when he was angry. I was building a tactical profile, because when you are dealing with a hostile target, you never strike on emotion. You gather data, you wait for the vulnerability, and you strike with overwhelming precision. The tipping point happened. In late September, Megan called me, her voice trembling, asking if I could bring some important contract documents Brandon had left on the kitchen counter down to the marina. He was furious, and she was terrified of his temper. I fired up my rattling gray pickup and drove down to the docks. The marina was gleaming with multi-million-dollar vessels. Brandon was standing on the teak deck of a luxury cruiser, surrounded by a group of wealthy, laughing clients wearing designer sunglasses. I parked my beat-up truck and walked down the dock, holding the manila envelope. The contrast was stark. I smelled like motor oil. They smelled like expensive champagne and unearned confidence. When Brandon saw me approaching, his smile vanished, replaced by sheer disgust. He didn't see a father-in-law doing him a massive favor. He saw a peasant ruining his aesthetic. He hopped off the boat and snatched the envelope, leaning in close so his clients wouldn't hear. "I told Megan to hire a courier," he hissed. "I can't have you showing up looking like a homeless mechanic when I'm closing a $3 million deal. Walt, it makes me look bad." I looked calmly into his furious eyes. "She was worried you needed these immediately. I was just trying to help." "Help?" He let out a harsh bark of a laugh. He turned back toward his wealthy clients, raising his voice. "Hey folks, meet my father-in-law. He's our local charity case. Spends his days tinkering with broken lawnmowers and telling sea stories that never happened." The clients chuckled politely. I didn't flinch, I didn't defend my honor. I just gave him a slow, measured nod. "I'll let you get back to work, son." I walked away, feeling his smug gaze burning a hole between my shoulder blades. He honestly believed he had put me in my place. He mistook my silence for submission, completely unaware that in my world, silence is the final warning you get before the hammer drops. The hammer dropped exactly 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday. Around midnight, the coastal rain was hammering against my metal roof. I was sitting at my workbench, cleaning a carburetor, enjoying the solitude. Suddenly my phone lit up the dark garage. It was a text message from Megan. "Hey Dad, can you send me Mom's clam chowder recipe?" And directly underneath it, on a separate line, were 3 digits, 407. My blood instantly turned to ice water. 47 meant one thing, and one thing only. It was the distress code we had practiced all those years ago. It translated directly: danger. Now, call the police. I need immediate extraction. I stared at that glowing screen for maybe 2 seconds. And in that tiny fraction of time, 27 years of suppressed military training woke up inside my bones all at once. It wasn't loud, it wasn't shaking. It was cold, clear, and terribly calm. I stood up slowly. I wiped the grease off my hands. I walked over to the heavy steel gun, safe bolted to the concrete floor, spun the dial, and opened it. I didn't open it because I wanted to hurt anybody. I opened it because my child was terrified, and there is absolutely nothing on this earth more dangerous or more lethal than an old man whose child is afraid. Young men think fear is loud. They think it looks like a pounding heart and shaking hands. But real fear, the kind that arrives when someone you love might be dying, doesn't shout. It goes quiet, it goes freezing cold, it gets brutally efficient. That is exactly how I felt driving the dark river road toward their subdivision. The windshield wipers were violently shoving heavy sheets of rain off the glass. My old truck rattled hard over every pothole, but I barely felt the steering wheel. I was completely dialed in. I had the 911 dispatch operator on the speakerphone. "Sir, can you describe the situation at the residence?" "Possible domestic assault in progress," I stated, my voice completely devoid of panic. "Adult female inside the home, adult male, hostile, likely intoxicated. Are weapons involved?" "Sir?" "Unknown at this time, sir. Are you approaching the residence right now?" I watched the headlights cut through the driving rain. "Yes, sir. I need you to pull over. Please wait for our officers to arrive on scene." "No, ma'am," I said quietly, never taking my foot off the gas pedal. "I won't be doing that." There was a heavy pause on the line then. Very carefully, she asked, "Sir, are you armed?" "Yes, it's locked in a secure lockbox in the vehicle. I do not intend to use it," and that part was the absolute truth. People fundamentally misunderstand men with my background. They picture us as aggressive attack dogs hungry for violence. The reality is that most of us spend the back half of our lives doing everything in our power to ensure we never have to touch that kind of violence ever again. Their neighborhoods sat at the very edge of town, shrouded in darkness. Wet pavement, not a single soul moving in the storm, but their house was a beacon of chaos. The downstairs lights were blazing violently. I could hear him screaming before I even turned off the truck's engine. I stepped out into the freezing rain and crossed the front yard. Age changes the way a man moves. My knees ache sharply, and my right shoulder pops loudly. But the tactical muscle memory never truly leaves you. The balance, the calculated timing, the deeply ingrained habit of rolling your steps from heel to toe to stay completely silent. I crept up to the large front window and peered through the blinds. Every single fear I had carried in my chest for the last 2 years instantly turned solid. Megan was backed hard against the kitchen counter. She was sobbing, her hands raised defensively, a thin, bright thread of blood leaking from her swollen lip. Brandon was standing mere inches from her face, roaring. The floor between them was littered with the shattered remains of a thrown whiskey glass. He grabbed her arm hard enough to make her stumble forward, and something inside my chest went perfectly, completely still. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot. Anger is sloppy. Anger is an emotion reserved for amateurs who lose control. What I felt was something much older and far colder. This was the exact clinical sensation you feel when you are watching a rabid wolf walk slowly toward a defenseless child. You don't hate the wolf. You just know exactly what you have to do to stop it. I moved swiftly around to the side gate, disappearing into the shadows of the yard. The patio door had been left open a few inches, the heavy curtain breathing in and out with the storm wind. Inside, Brandon was shouting, "You think your pathetic old man is going to come save you? That washed-up mechanic?" Megan whimpered, pressing herself harder against the counter. "Please, Brandon. Please stop." Then, he shoved her hard in the collarbone. It wasn't enough to knock her to the floor, but it was just enough to show absolute dominance. It was enough to terrify her. And that was more than enough for me. I will be completely honest with you right here, at the exact moment where it mattered the most. If that had been me at 30 years old, standing outside that patio door, that arrogant man would have left his custom kitchen on a stretcher, drinking his meals through a plastic straw. And I would have called it righteous justice. But 30 years of living had taught me something crucial. 30-year-old me had never known that the loudest, most violent answer is almost never the one that truly protects the people you love. Sometimes true power is absolute restraint, so I didn't kick the glass door off its hinges. I didn't shout a dramatic warning. I simply slid the glass open and walked in. The expensive hardwood floors barely whispered under my wet boots. I moved like a shadow detached from the wall. Brandon didn't even notice I was in the room until Megan's tear-filled eyes shot past his shoulder, widening in pure shock. "Dad?" she gasped. Brandon spun around. He swayed slightly on his feet, the bourbon radiating off him in toxic waves. When he saw me standing there in my soaking wet flannel, he actually smiled. Well, look who it is," he slurred, throwing his arms wide. "Captain America to the rescue." "What are you gonna do, old man? Change my oil?" I kept walking forward, my pace slow, rhythmic, and perfectly even. I didn't break eye contact. "Step away from her, Brandon," he scoffed, a wet, ugly sound. "Or what, you gonna hit me with a wrench?" I stopped exactly 4 feet away from him, the critical striking distance. I repeated the command in the exact same dead tone. "Step away from my daughter." Megan's breath was coming in short, panicked gulps. She pressed herself tighter against the marble counter. Brandon threw his hands up. "Oh no, everybody. The old mechanic is serious." Then his face hardened into an ugly sneer. He jabbed a thick finger toward my chest. "You want to know your real problem, Walt? Everybody in this pathetic little town treats you like some wise old hero. But you're nothing. You're just a washed-up nobody hiding in a dirty garage." I didn't answer him. People who watch too many movies think violence announces itself with a witty comeback. Real danger is perfectly silent until the very last microsecond. Annoyed by my lack of reaction, he took 2 hard, aggressive steps toward me, raising his hands. That was his fatal mistake. The absolute instant his right shoulder dropped to initiate a shove, the decades of buried muscle memory simply took the wheel. I didn't even have to think. My body executed the protocol. It was one single, fluid motion. That's all it took. Before his hand could reach my collar, I stepped inside his guard. I caught his extending arm, twisted my hips, stepped in deep behind his center of gravity, and put him face down onto his own imported kitchen tile. He hit the floor hard, before he even had the chance to finish cocking his fist. The breath exploded out of his lungs in a sharp gasp of bourbon and shock. I immediately drove my knee into the sweet spot between his shoulder blades, pinning his weight. I grabbed his right wrist and cranked it up high behind his back. It was a firm, controlled joint lock now here, near the dangerous edge of snapping the bone, but calibrated perfectly to own his entire nervous system. If he moved an inch, his shoulder would feel like it was being torn from the socket. He thrashed wildly under me, stunned by the sudden violent shift in reality. "What the hell? How did you stop resisting?" I commanded, my voice as calm as a Sunday morning. Megan stood absolutely frozen by the counter, both of her hands clamped tightly over her mouth. Brandon bucked his hips, trying to muscle his way out. I simply shifted the angle of my grip by a fraction of a hair. He let out a strangled, high-pitched scream. Pain compliance, it is precise, it is temporary, and it is a highly effective old skill. You're hurting me, he spat, his face pressed against the cold tile. No, I replied, leaning my weight evenly. You are restrained, there is a massive difference. Now stop moving. That infuriated him even more than the physical pain. But the entire physical altercation lasted maybe 30 seconds before the flashing red and blue lights came washing violently across the living room walls. Heavy boots pounded onto the front porch. 2 sheriff's deputies came bursting through the front door, moving fast, their service weapons drawn and ready. Sheriff's office. Nobody move. I didn't panic. I slowly let go of Brandon's wrist and raised my empty hands smoothly into the air, keeping my movements entirely visible and predictable. Victim is secure by the counter, I announced clearly, using standard law enforcement cadence. Suspect is face down and restrained. I am unarmed, and here is the specific moment I will never forget. Both deputies froze for half a heartbeat, assessing the chaotic scene. The younger deputy kept his weapon aimed squarely at Brandon. But the older deputy, a veteran with gray at his temples, lowered his sights slightly and looked directly at me. I watched the realization happen right behind his eyes. He saw the unnaturally calm breathing. He noticed the strategic angle I had taken to monitor both the suspect and the exit points. He recognized the specific joint lock I had used, a restraint that completely dominated an opponent without leaving a single bruise. He knew, the way one of us always instantly recognizes another. If you have ever spent years of your life being actively underestimated, being looked straight through by arrogant men, then you understand exactly what that one brief look of mutual respect was worth to me. He didn't say a word about it. He didn't have to. Sometimes, being truly seen by the right person for half a second is worth infinitely more than a lifetime of cheap applause from the wrong ones. Sir, the older deputy said respectfully, holstering his weapon. Can you stand up nice and slow for me, please? I nodded once and rose off the man's back. The absolute second my weight left him, Brandon rolled over, clutching his shoulder and howling like a wounded animal. This psycho attacked me, arrest him. The older deputy didn't even glance down at him. He stepped over Brandon's thrashing legs and looked directly at my trembling daughter. Ma'am, are you hurt? Megan's swollen lip trembled. Yes, she whispered. That single fragile word turned the entire gravity of the room. The younger deputy forcefully hauled Brandon up off the floor, slammed him face first against the refrigerator, and ratcheted the steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. He started reading him his Miranda rights loudly over the top of Brandon's furious shouting. You can't arrest me. He attacked me first. This is insane. Nobody listened. And once the handcuffs clicked shut, Megan finally came completely apart. It wasn't delicate, polite crying. It was the agonizing release of years of held-down terror pouring out of her chest all at once. Her knees gave out, and her whole body started shaking violently. I immediately pulled a heavy knitted throw blanket off the back of a dining chair and wrapped it tightly around her trembling shoulders. It was the exact same way I used to wrap her up during heavy thunderstorms when she was 6. I pulled her into my chest. It's okay, I whispered into her hair. I've got you, you're safe now. She grabbed onto my soaked flannel shirt and held on like I was the only solid thing left in the universe. And that sound, the sound of her relief, nearly finished me. Because fathers always tell themselves that they will instantly recognize their child's suffering the very moment it starts. We believe we are the ultimate protectors, but sometimes the darkness grows so slowly, right inside your own family, and you somehow miss it. I had missed it. The older deputy stepped close once the paramedics arrived. He kept his voice low, strictly between the two of us. You serve? He asked quietly. I gave a single tight nod, retired Navy. His eyes dropped for a fraction of a second to the spot on the floor where I had pinned Brandon, then came back up to meet mine. Well, he said softly, you handled that situation like an absolute professional. It almost made me laugh bitterly. Professional, as if this were just another tactical operation. But it wasn't a mission. It was my daughter's life, and standing in that wrecked kitchen, One devastating thought hit me harder than any punch ever had. I should have come sooner. The strangest thing about a house following violence is the heavy silence that comes next. It is never a peaceful quiet. It is a dense, suffocating silence that permanently soaks into the furniture and drywall. Megan came home with me that night. For the first few days, she slept in her childhood bedroom under the quilt her mother had sewn. The very first morning, I was up long before the sun. Megan came shuffling down the stairs. Her split lip looked significantly worse in the harsh daylight. Seeing that physical evidence of her trauma pulled my chest tight. She poured herself a mug of coffee but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry," she whispered. "For what, sweetheart?" "For all of this mess." That reflexive apology told me everything I needed to know about how long she had been trapped. Victims learn to apologize merely for surviving. "You don't owe me an apology, honey," I said gently. Her eyes filled with hot tears. "I should have left him a long time ago, Dad. I was so stupid." "Maybe. But fear keeps good people in terrible places way longer than they ever should stay." She said the one thing that broke my heart. "I didn't want you to think I was a failure." At 69 years old, certain sentences still know exactly how to slide between your ribs. Because here is the ugly truth. Some of her isolation was my fault. I was not an easy, emotionally available father after Helen died. Men of my generation were raised to treat grief like a weakness. You keep your mouth shut, and you keep moving. So I had quietly disappeared into myself. Children feel that emotional distance more than we let ourselves believe. A few days later, Detective Ramos knocked on my front door. Sharp-eyed and carrying a no-time-for-nonsense demeanor, she sat at my kitchen table, going through police reports. "We went through his phone and laptop after the arrest," Ramos stated bluntly. "There's a highly documented pattern of behavior supporting ongoing, systematic abuse. The texts alone are damning." Megan looked down. "There's more." She reached into her purse and placed a small flash drive on the table. "I started secretly recording the arguments a few months ago." Ramos plugged the drive into her laptop. The very first audio clip was 40 seconds long. We heard Brandon screaming, shattering glass, Megan crying uncontrollably, and then one specific sentence that turned my blood to frost. "If your pathetic old father ever sticks his nose in my business, I swear to God I'll make sure he deeply regrets it." Detective Ramos slid her headphones off. "Well, that is going to help your case quite a bit." Megan flinched. "I know secretly recording him was wrong. It feels sneaky." Ramos stopped her immediately. "No, honey, surviving is never wrong." The preliminary hearing came in late October. Megan sat rigidly beside me in the courthouse hallway. She looked healthier, but was still visibly fragile. Inside the courtroom, Brandon looked remarkably small. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by an ill-fitting county jumpsuit. Several weeks in a county cell had hollowed out his arrogant eyes. His high-priced defense lawyer immediately started painting Brandon as the true victim. He pointed directly at me, calling me a dangerous, unhinged old vigilante who violently assaulted a man in his own home using excessive, military-style force. I sat perfectly still. I didn't give him an ounce of reaction. The prosecutor didn't look stressed. Hard evidence doesn't care about a theatrical performance. She presented the photos of Megan's injuries, the horrifying audio recordings, and the terrified neighbors' sworn statements. Then she played the police body cam footage. The entire courtroom watched as the deputies burst into that kitchen. There I was on the screen, kneeling on Brandon's back. I was completely calm, holding him down with surgical precision, never throwing a single punch, while he screamed drunken threats. The defense lawyer's vigilante argument died instantly right there on the monitor. But Brandon wasn't done humiliating himself. On the stand, he blamed the alcohol, the stress of the yacht market, and Megan for provoking him. Then he glared dead at me and sneered, "He brainwashed her against me. That old man ruined my marriage." Something deep inside my daughter finally hardened into steel. Megan stood up in the gallery before the prosecutor could object. "No," she declared. The entire courtroom turned to stare. "My father didn't brainwash me." She took a long breath. "He saved my life." Dead silence. Megan then laid out the years of psychological torture, daily insults, and systematic isolation. "I stopped recognizing myself in that marriage," Megan said, her voice echoing. "Because war wounds a soldier, but you can still see the soldier underneath." Abuse completely erases a person while they are still standing right in front of you. During the court recess, the prosecutor found me standing by the vending machines. "Special operations, weren't you?" she asked quietly. I gave a small nod. "How did you know?" She smiled faintly. "My father was a Force Recon Marine. Your physical restraint that night probably saved this entire case." "Mr. Brandt, how do you mean?" "If you had lost your temper and beaten him bloody, the defense would have successfully put you on trial instead. They would have made Brandon the victim of police brutality." I nodded slowly. She was absolutely right. Taking brutal revenge feels incredibly satisfying for about 60 seconds. But maintaining absolute control is what actually protects people for years. Sentencing came exactly 6 weeks later. Megan almost didn't go. But in the end, she decided she needed to walk into that courtroom and physically close the door herself. That morning, I went into my attic and unzipped a heavy garment bag. I pulled out my dress white uniform. I hadn't worn it since Helen's funeral. I carefully pinned the medals back onto the chest. One at a time, I held my silver star for a long moment before fixing it to my chest. I never cared much for shiny medals. They can't bring anybody back, but they remind comfortable folks that extreme sacrifice existed long before their daily comfort got so easy. When I walked through the wooden doors of that courtroom in full dress whites, every single conversation stopped dead. Megan stared at me, her eyes wide. "You never wear that, I know," I said quietly, taking my seat beside her. Brandon looked absolutely stunned when he saw me. For the first time since I had known him, genuine, undisguised fear crossed his face. It wasn't fear of getting physically hurt. It was the sickening realization that the quiet, washed-up mechanic he had mocked had been carrying weights his entire life that Brandon couldn't have held for a single week. When the proceedings concluded, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood up slowly, every joint reminding me of my age, but my voice came out perfectly steady. "I spent a significant portion of my life surrounded by violence," I said, looking directly at the judge. "I have seen war, I have seen fear and profound loss, and the one defining truth that all of it taught me is this." I turned and looked directly into Brandon's hollow eyes. "Strength has absolutely nothing to do with making people afraid of you." Brandon swallowed hard. "Real strength is protecting the people who cannot protect themselves, especially your own family." I paused. "I don't hate Brandon." Megan looked up, startled. "I hate what he became," I clarified. "I hate what he did to my daughter, but hate is a poison that just keeps doing damage if you keep feeding it. I am asking this court for strict accountability today, not destruction. This is the part of the story I most need you to carry with you. The mistake most angry people make is believing that the satisfying ending and the right ending are the exact same thing. Most of the room believed I would ask for the heaviest, most brutal hammer the law could swing. But you can refuse to become the monster that hurt you. And that refusal is not a sign of weakness. It is the hardest, most unyielding strength there is. The judge delivered a severe sentence: real prison time, mandatory alcohol treatment, a domestic violence rehabilitation program, and a permanent restraining order. As the bailiffs clamped the chains around him, Brandon stopped. He turned to Megan, his eyes instantly filled with tears-broken tears of a man who finally realized what he had thrown away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. Megan didn't answer. She just held my hand tightly and watched him disappear. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of fear was completely gone from her eyes. Winter moved slowly after the trial. By February, the hard Oregon rain had softened. Megan found a quiet little apartment downtown, right above a flower shop. Safety becomes incredibly beautiful after you survive chaos. She went back to work at the local library. The people in our small town were incredibly gentle with her. People who have lived long enough always know deep pain when they see it. I changed too. I started showing up again. An old Marine named Dale talked me into attending the Wednesday morning breakfast at the local VFW hall. It turns out, old combat soldiers laugh a lot more than anybody expects. We almost never talked about the war, mostly. We just spent our time learning how to love an ordinary, quiet morning. In the late spring, Megan brought my 10-year-old grandson, Eli, over for Sunday supper. He tore through my overgrown backyard like he owned it. Children bounce back from tension far faster than grown-ups do, provided you give them real safety. We sat on the wooden dock, catching small perch. Ellie studied me with serious eyes. Mom told me you tackled Dad to the floor like a superhero. Your mother exaggerates, Eli. No, she doesn't, he insisted. Then, softly, he asked the devastating question. Grandpa, why was Dad so mean to her? Sometimes, Eli, people carry a deep, ugly anger inside them that they never learned how to put down. Did he hate Mom? No, that's the saddest part of the whole thing. Then why did he hurt her? Because some broken people confuse loving somebody with owning them. And you can never own another person. He nodded, serious as a judge. I handed him back the fishing rod. You want to know what real strength actually is, Eli? What? Real strength is making people feel absolutely safe when they are standing next to you. Early that summer, Megan came by with a plain envelope bearing a state prison stamp. It was from Brandon. The letter was handwritten, messy and rushed. There were zero excuses, just a brutal, honest accounting of his crippling insecurity, his desperate need to control everything, and his overwhelming shame. One specific line stayed burned into my memory. I spent years trying to feel powerful by deliberately making other people smaller. Understanding the machine is how you make sure you never accidentally build one yourself. Do you forgive him, Dad? Megan asked. At my age, I have learned that forgiveness isn't a simple light switch. It is a grueling, conscious decision you have to make over and over again. I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. She leaned her head on my shoulder. That's fair. But thank you for saving me. I looked down at my daughter and realized a profound truth. I hadn't saved her alone. She had saved herself the exact microsecond she found the incredible courage to send that distressed text. A few Sundays after that, the entire family gathered at my place. We had fried chicken and sweet cornbread. The warm summer sun poured through the kitchen windows. Ellie laughed hysterically at the television, listening to my family's voices filling the house again. I finally understood something. It took me nearly 70 years to learn. When I was young and carrying a rifle, I thought strength meant winning the bloody fight. Then war taught me that strength meant surviving the crushing pain. But growing old taught me the real truth. Real strength is answering the phone when someone you love is afraid. It is staying perfectly calm when unleashing violent rage would be so much easier. It is protecting the people you love without losing your own soul in the process. And sometimes, the absolute hardest kind of strength there is simply letting yourself heal too.